Hello, this is Andrea from OurDayDream, and today I want to introduce a friend of mine and a musician, and his name is Matt Sassano. So go ahead and let him in.
Oh snap, I think we got this, man. Can you hear me?
It's good.
Got it, man. How are you?
Yay. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Just kind of do that whole technical issue. Almost had my whole day occupied, but we are here doing this thing, man. How has it been since the Seventh Day Slumber concert tour and everything like that when you kind of came to see everything?
Oh, it's been pretty good. I looked at a little bit of the touring that you have coming up. It's in like California and stuff. You're not making it to Pennsylvania, huh?
Not this time around. I guess we're going to be going on the West Coast. We'll be doing New Mexico. We'll be doing California. We'll be doing, I think, Florida shows, and it's a straight month. So we leave October, or we leave, well, it's February 4th, and then we are pretty much on the road up until March. And so, yeah, it's a whole different world for me. And as you saw, like, I pretty much put my full energy on the stage when I'm up there. So night after night after night of that, I'm going to be one tired person, but we're excited to push my limits, man, for sure.
Yeah, that schedule that you sent me, that's pretty wild. That looks that looks pretty jam-packed.
Yeah, and they're long drives in between some of them. Like, I know the first couple days are like travel days through and through. I haven't really, I mean, Lori, who is Joseph's wife from Seventh Day Slumber, she does most of the booking and kind of keeps everybody, knowing where they're going. But I do know that there are some pretty hefty travel days, like for the first couple. And so yeah, we're excited to do it. And like I said, it's one of those challenges where it's like, man, I hope I have this in me. It's gonna be a lot, but we're excited because every single time we go to a show, like people really enjoy it and they've been touched by the message of it and everything like that. And so, yeah, absolutely, man. You'll have to fly out and catch one of the other shows.
That would give me an excuse to go to California,
Oh, absolutely, man. That would be awesome.
huh?
I have I haven't been to California for a long, long time. I used to, before I got into music, I actually traveled with like a Christian drama team. We traveled a lot of places for, I was only on it for a short stint, but we like would set up and I wasn't a very good actor, but they had me on this drama team called like The Glory and the Fire. And I remember being in Sacramento, California, doing one of their things. So this is kind of my return. It's something completely different as a
Yeah.
musician. So it's gonna be different, but it's kind of more up my alley. I just was not a very good actor at all.
Well, that makes sense though that you have acting in your background though, like with the drum. That like definitely helped you with your on-stage presence for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it really. I mean, I've always had a passion to do something in music and everything like that. Um, and it was just kind of trying to find my way because a long time I didn't play an instrument. I didn't do really anything in music up until I was like, it was like 10 years ago till I was 25. And um, my first kind of taking a stab at music was I saw my stepdad Steve play bass for the worship team, and I was like, that doesn't seem that hard. Like I feel like I could do something like that. And I started on bass, and my initial plan was to play bass and write the songs, you know what I mean, and then have like other singers involved in the projects that I was doing. But what I quickly found out is that there's not a lot of dedicated band members out there. So I was kind of in my first ever band called Transparent. We were in upstate New York, a small town, just trying to make it work. And so like week after week, I'd come into the situation where like I'd draft a singer and then he would drop out the next week. And then we'd be like, okay, we need to find a new singer. And so I just became really discouraged with what was going on. And I went to this church one time in the process of, trying to figure out everything. And this lady that I had not known, it was kind of a new church. She called me up in the middle of a service and she was like, hey, you, come over here. And I was like, all right, you know, she called me up front. I was in front of this whole church, and maybe, you know, 100 and 200 people or something like that. And she said, you know, I don't really know you, but I feel strongly that God wants to use you in music. And I was all about that. I was like, all right, like you in music, until she said, and he wants you to sing. And I up until that point, I had never sang a note in my life. Like I would,
Wow.
like I said, my initial intention was to just play bass, write the songs, and have somebody else sing my songs. And so that was a real stretch for me. I was like, are you sure that you heard God right? And he's like, I swear he told me that he wants you to sing. And from there, I just kind of like, it took maybe a 2 to 3 week battle with God of just like, are you sure this is what you want me to do? And line upon line, I just got better and better. And here I am now with, you know, just me up there. As you know, as you saw on
Yeah.
the Slumber tour, I don't have a band to rely on. So it went from like this 5-piece band to me doing the tracks and like the smoke blowers and everything, and just becoming, over the course of 10 years, the front man that I am today, that can stand up on stage by himself and just minister to people and talk about my struggles, and, you know, try to entertain people as best I can as one person. And that's kind of a tough gig, but it's
Yeah.
worked out so far.
Yeah. That's incredible that you, how old were you whenever you figured out that you could actually sing?
Okay, so this is gonna age me a little bit, but I actually, despite being the handsome man that I am 35. So I want to say that I started like bass on the youth worship team at about 19 years old, but it wasn't up until I was like 24 or 25 that I started drafting my own musicians and stuff like that for bands, you know what I mean? Like my first band was just like a small town band called Transparent, which meant like a lot of what you know about my story is like I was raised in a pastor's home. I had a lot of disabilities. I have cerebral palsy and dyscalculia, and part of my story, aside from the disabilities, was that I was actually very. Oh snap! We are back 100%. We were having some technical issues, but where the oh, it's just not our day with technology. My goodness.
Well, you know, whenever something good's happened, Satan's always there to try to block it.
Man, I guess so. And he was doing a good job, but we are not giving this up, man. We are just on.
No,
We are just
you're
on.
awesome. I'm grateful.
We were basically talking about my beginnings in music. Like for my first band when I was 25, like I was telling you about how, you know a lot about my disabilities and things like that. But I also was very involved in church life, raised as a pastor's son, and I got to see a lot of the good side of church and like what that can bring, but I also got to see a lot of the dark, um, you know, things that hypocrisy can bring. Because my dad was a pastor, and behind the scenes was very abusive to me and my mother, and so I kind of grew to try to figure out what was real and what was not in my own mind. I was trying to figure out, like, I do believe in God. I've always believed in God, and I was just trying to figure out, like, with everything that was surrounding me at the time, like what was the true example that I could follow. And so with my first band name, it was called Transparent, because I always wanted to be a person that, was honest about what he was going through and like what his struggles were, and all that kind of thing. And so it kind of grew from that to another band. When I moved in 2014, I got taken under the wing of a producer named Travis Wyrick, who kind of helped me rebrand things. And then from there, I just found that, like, I was better off just doing solo work, because it's hard, man. Like, this whole band life is very hard to find people with the same work ethic or spiritual goals. And so I just found myself in this state of like, what do I do? And so 3 years ago, I kind of rebranded everything and put it under my own name, and just worked really, really hard to do what we're doing. And now, just looking back, it's like I wouldn't have believed that I would be on tour with Seventh Day Slumber, which is a band that I listened to since I was 17. So it's been really cool to kind of see the behind the scenes and kind of how much um, Seventh Day Slumber kind of has a heart for ministry and really does try to bring their message to small churches, big churches, like everywhere across. They really are very dedicated. We even did some prison ministry when we were there, and I got a standing ovation and a lot of just really kind words from some inmates and stuff that were saying, dude, I've been here, but like what you've said, really touched my life. And it was really crazy because I didn't expect that. Like, yeah, so it's been a journey, but each and every phase, I feel like God provides me with what I need for that particular part of the journey. And now it's like crazy to be here and doing this tour night after night after night after night.
Yeah.
And from somebody who just grew up in like a small town and there really wasn't anything going on musically. I just grew up in this small town called Canisteo, New York, and I was like, man, I've always had like those dreams of doing the music thing, but like, how do I get there? And God has just pushed me from, not to say it was easy. It's definitely has not been an easy journey, but God always like came through and, phase upon phase was always there to go like, okay, this is what you're meant to do. Keep going, don't give up.
It's definitely undeniable that 3 years ago you decided to brand your own name, Matt Sassano, and then 3 years later you're on your second tour with Seventh Day Slumber, and going all over. Like the tour that you're going on next is pretty big, so that's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it's gonna be a crazy time, and like, it basically we travel with only two people at this point right now. It's my stepdad Steve, who's always been really supportive of me doing this music thing, um, and he played a pretty good part in like introducing me to music. When I was growing up, even before him and my mom were married, he was the worship leader at my church, and so he was the guy that I kind of looked at and was like, maybe he could teach me some bass lessons and everything like that. And about the time, this is a long story, but about the time my parents, my biological father and my mother divorced, I was just going through a really hard time, and he was there, just like trying to lift me up, and he was the one that kind of encouraged, like, I know that you have musical talent. Why don't you start your own band? And this was 10 years ago. We were in Indiana for like a road trip because at that time I was just trying to figure out life. And he was like, let's go to Indiana. We'll, hang out for a little bit. We'll find stuff to do. Let's get out of this scenery and just go somewhere. And upon that road trip in like 2010, 2011, he was like, I know you've got a passion for music. Why don't we just start your own band? I'll manage it. And you be the front man of this thing. Little did we know that, it'd still be around today and it'd go through so many different facelifts. But, rebranding has been a huge part of why I do what I do. And now we've got my new song, Not My Name, which is trending on the Christian charts. It's on the charts with bands that I looked up to growing up: Disciple, Seventh Day Slumber, there's Zana, all sorts of different bands. I'm
Thank
on
God.
the radio now. So it's really cool, and I love to see how that song is impacting people, because as you know, it's a song about escaping the labels that people put on you. Growing up with disabilities, cerebral palsy, I was labeled every single day of my life. You can't do this, you can't do that. Doctors, I grew up in a state of just being in a lot of like physical therapy meetings where I'd have to go and kind of confront my limitations. And that was always hard because as somebody who's, I've always had this personality. I've always kind of been a person that is very social and very cool. I hate to toot my own horn, but like it was hard sometimes to just like confront the reality that like, you had these setbacks. And when teachers would remind you like, yeah, you're disabled, you're this, you're that, it would just make you feel completely deflated because I didn't want to see that part of me. And so when I wrote Not My Name as a tribute to the people going through disabilities, or some people that are, just maybe the black sheep that don't have disabilities, maybe have just never felt comfortable in their own skin. Maybe they go to church and they're kind of the odd man out. Maybe they, have just been shunned by society, and the labels that people put on you, God sees through them and says, man, that's not your name. I've created you to be a bigger thing, a better person.
Right.
And I know who you are because I've created you. And that's basically the premise behind that new song that just debuted.
So with my like past background of domestic violence and being a woman that had endured that, that's where I'm at, because I was called all kinds of crazy names. And after a while, you have to, when you find God, it's like you're not that person that they said that you were. So it really hits home for me. But also too, I have people listen to it in the recovery community. And, it's like you're a drug addict and you always will be. You're an alcoholic, you're a loser. Like, you
Wow.
ruined our lives, the things that you do, and it's all you. And so it's really inspirational too to like watch them listen to it and their eyes just like, wow, like that's really hitting me hard, that this isn't who I am. Um, yeah.
Absolutely, man. Those stigmas can follow you for your whole life. And in fact, you saw when I did the live show with 7 Day Slumber, I came up on stage with a hoodie that said, loser and all these labels on it. Well, now we've got the official merchandise that has the labels on it. And on the back it says, Matt Sassano, Not My Name. And part of that shirt, I put addict on there because I know that that's a huge thing for people. And when I was on the 7 Day Slumber tour, we met a whole bunch of people in recovery situations and just got to share their story. They were like that were similar to yours, where it was just like, I'm trying to overcome this drug addiction. I'm doing so good, but sometimes it's just so hard to escape the stigmas that people are putting on me. And it's
Yeah.
almost like a continuous curse where people just don't see the effort that they're putting in to try to overcome these things. And so for the new t-shirts, I decided, after being on the tour and hearing those stories, to put addict on as one of the labels. And so it's good to hear you kind of tell part of your story, because I know that that's a huge thing for people. It's just like
Yeah.
overcoming those drug addictions or alcohol addictions, and then just having that title follow them their entire life.
Yeah. We have this in our head that like once you do something, that's who you're going to be forever. And society oftentimes, um, definitely follows that. It's like you did wrong in your life, so you're always going to be that troublemaker. But God really does like change everything about you, if you accept God into your life. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, like, so what was a sign to you that God was changing you when you went from, you know, addict to where you are now? Like, what was one of the first initial signs where you're like, wow, this is kind of different?
Yeah, so I was like, it was like 20 years around about since I was last in a church. And before I went into the church that day, I would go out and I would get so intoxicated that sometimes I couldn't even walk out of the bar.
Oh,
Um
wow. Yeah.
yeah, so but I was in that church that day and I couldn't help, like, I felt the spirit so strong that, I cried through a lot of the service. I felt that it was speaking to me. I don't exactly remember what was being told, but it definitely wasn't nothing to do with, drinking alcohol or anything like that. But I remember
Right.
I was like, I left the church and I went to a restaurant and that restaurant was closed. And then I went to another restaurant and I was just getting ready to go in and it was like, bam, it just hit me. I'm like, I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to do that no more. And so like at that moment on, I was absolutely convicted that, that's not the person that I'm supposed to be, that I was meant to be, that I need to be. And yeah, so it was just like a light bulb moment, and but it was like a part of who I was instantly in that moment.
Wow. How would you describe, like, is there still a constant struggle with it, or is it just one of those things? I know some people when they tell, addiction stories, some of them are like, man, God got rid of it and it was just poof gone, and other people are just like, I'm still working through it. So how would you describe your experience with that?
Yeah, so in recovery, like NAAA, it's like every meeting you would go there and you would be like, "Hi, I'm Andrea, I'm an addict." But like I had an interview with Terry Vassar last week, and he was saying that he kind of had a road to Damascus experience. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he said very many, like not everybody has that, experience where you're just converted. And he had went through the same thing. It was just like all of a sudden that it was just broken off of him. And so that was definitely a thing. Now, did I go out and have like a drink or two? Absolutely. But I didn't feel the need to go any further than that. And then I remember having the conversation with you one time saying like you didn't want to, be in a place drinking and you be role modeling in that form. And I was like, I don't even need that drink or two. So yeah, it's like not even
Yeah.
I don't miss it. I don't need it. It was basically like I would go listen to music and I would just have one or two while I was sitting there. But now it's to the point where like I just don't even care to go out at all. But yeah, so it was definitely like just broken off of me, like that
Yeah.
spirit.
That's awesome, man. And that was one of the things that, I mean, my big vice was smoking cigarettes. Like I would chain smoke until it was just crazy. And I think that music kind of saved my life, because when I linked up with Travis, who kind of was one of the people that was producing um, one of my earlier bands, he basically was like, "Hey, man, you need to quit this like right now. You're in the vocal booth and you can't breathe." He's like, so from then on, like it was the hardest struggle. He was like, at least switch to the vape, or something. You know what I mean? At
Yeah.
least tell me that you're taking steps. And so I went from like a 2 pack a day smoker, just kind of like, I always had a heart for God, but that was always the one thing that like really got me. And so with him being an influence in my life, I was able to do that. And now I'm just chewing nicotine gum. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's one of those
Yeah.
things where like I'm not destroying my lungs, and I'm just incrementally getting to the point where I'm nicotine free. But the drinking thing was one of those things that was always not a struggle for me, but I know in band life, like you see me on the 7 Day Slumber recovery tour, but when I first started music, I was kind of a square peg in a round hole, because we would be doing bars and clubs as a Christian act, along with a lot of secular bands as well. And so I really had to figure out, like, I know my heart was always right to just kind of set the right example, and not to say that I'm perfect, but like that's just not something that I really wanted to do. But again, when it came back to having band members back in the day, before I became a solo artist, you would run into band people that you would have that would, you know, they could have great hearts and be Christians, but they also would go at the bars and be drinking while they were
Yeah.
performing these sets, and in front of a lot of the people that maybe didn't understand faith and didn't understand like that we are supposed to kind of just be as clean as we can. And
Yeah.
so that became a thing where it was just like, hey man, like I understand what you do is what you do, but like let's try to like limit the drinking, especially
Yeah.
when we're trying to represent something. And so eventually it just got to a frustration point where I was just like, man, I hate to do this, but I I I don't know. It's just not sitting with me, right? And so I'm glad
Right.
now that I can go into a place, even if it is a bar or a club or a big secular type or like place, and not have that, desire, not have that thing around me, because that's just, one of those things where it's like, I don't know, I have no use for it personally. Nobody, everybody's on their separate journey, but as for me, I've always kind of wanted to represent who I am, which is somebody who gets up on the stage and is who he is on stage, off stage, and
Yeah.
that really what it's all about.
I was just talking about it last night, was the fact that when you're like a positive person and a positive influence, and you start seeing things more so in goodness rather than pessimism. Like, there's people watching you that you don't even know that they're watching you. It's like there's always somebody there, like, looking at you and seeing, what it is that's coming out of your mouth, what it is that you're saying, how it is that you're moving, how it is that you're reacting. And that could be in the grocery store, in your work environment, no matter where you're at. And they see you as a person of influence. So definitely, whenever you're trying to represent God, we should be influencing in a positive manner, because it is passing judgment onto God,
Yeah.
the way that we act and react to other human beings.
Yeah, and that's the thing where it's like I've always wanted to be upfront with the struggles that I have as a person, you know what I mean? Like, not that I'm perfect with that, but when I was, smoking cigarettes and just doing that really heavy, like, everybody knew it. I know that I've talked to you about this particular struggle, and I'll be writing a song about it. But pornography was like a huge struggle for me, and so I'm trying to use my platform to raise awareness, and just at least it's not hidden. You know what I mean? I'm one of those people that just, like, if I'm going through a struggle, you're probably going to know about it through either a song or something that I'm doing. But like, I lived my life, like I said, in a pastor's home where everything was kept hidden. So I always err on the side of just openness, maybe sometimes to my own detriment. Like, I don't really hear a lot of, Christian artists coming out about their porn addictions. But I'm one of
Yeah.
those people that I'm just like, man, if I don't address this, like, who will? Like, I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here, but it's like that's one of the issues along with disabilities that really doesn't really get talked about in the church as
Yeah.
much as it could. So I'm like, man, I know these are struggles, and it could definitely be one of those things where people look at you weird, but I just feel like God has called me to kind of, um, take the blinders off of some of these topics so people can openly discuss them, whether it be disabilities or pornography addiction or whatever it is in their lives that's kind of like holding them back or making them feel a certain way.
Yeah. And to understand too, like, we're all imperfect human beings. Like, we're
Absolutely.
we're all just like living the human experience, and trying to do the best that we can in this life. So and I think to the detriment of the church is this idea that they have it all figured out, but other people don't. But to understand that we all have, like, things that we need to be working through.
Absolutely. And I think openness is like the key to, a lot of these healings. Like, if we could just be real about what we're going through, because what happens is you end up hiding it. It comes out in a way that is not honest, and then the world looks at you like, oh man, there's another church scandal. There's another
Yeah.
something that went on, and it just further turns them off to the church, and it turns them off to ultimately God, because they're like, man. So with me, I'm just like, if we could just be upfront with it, if we could just be upfront with our struggles. But again, it's so hard because as a pastor's son, I know that the church has this thing sometimes, and it's just the way it is. When a leader is going through a hard time, like a pastor, there's really nowhere for him or her to
Yeah.
turn, because if you say that you struggle with pornography, if you say that you struggle with this or that, like your livelihood is largely gone, your platform's gone. They try to, rather than like paving you a road to redemption, it seems like a lot of the church just like ousts you out and says like you're no longer viable to us. You know, so
Right.
I've seen that where like well-meaning pastors or people would be like, you know what, listen, I've been struggling with pornography, I need help. And rather than giving them help, you know, I'm not saying every church is like this because I'm pretty sure there are some really great ones that are out there. But in some experiences, a lot of these churches, instead of helping the person through the thing, says, you know what, your hands are dirty and you're gone. And so, you know, it becomes this thing where it's like it becomes people hide what they're doing for sake of their family. Like they're like, oh man, if I don't do this, I can't be involved in the church. I can't, you know, this is kind of a, it shouldn't be a livelihood, but like unfortunately a lot of pastors that, you know, that's also a ministry, but it also provides for their families. And so they can't just be like, you know, I'm going to do this. There's all this fear about being ousted out of leadership and all that, which is pretty unfortunate that there's not like a way that we can go like, okay, we're struggling, but how can we help? Like, what do we do? There's
Yeah.
not a lot.
Yeah. And then too, I see it as like, um, like I try to tell people because I'm a big advocate for the church. And so
Yeah.
you got the religious people that won't go to church because they say they're all hypocrites and they're judgmental and there's corruption in the church. And then you have the religious people that actually do go to church. So I try to advocate to try to get the people into the church, so that we have more prayer in the church and more people there. Because sometimes, you know, it is that you go along this way and you don't have a mom, you don't have a dad, you don't have siblings, and you have the church to depend on. So we need people in the church to be there, you know, to be a body. But there's corruption in the church, and to get kind of morbid, whenever you have little kids that are dealing with being raped, you know,
Mm-hmm.
by their pastor, I'm the way I rationalize it is that we have good and evil in this world, and we have good and evil in us, in this world, in people. So it's only, you know, common sense to understand that it's going to probably be in the church as well. But what I think is inspiring about your story and would be inspiring, for people that have went through this is like, you were abused by your dad, whom was a pastor, and so he's ministering how to be a good, mighty man of God, and then going home and abusing you. Well, how did you, how and did you keep your faith with God through that whenever everything was fighting, working against what you were learning about God? It was like the opposite. Do you know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah. So with me, it was just like I was raised in it from such an early age, that like from the time I was a kid, like my dad would be very rough on me and everything. So I kind of grew up in that ecosystem where it was just kind of like dysfunction. So when you're growing up in something, as you know, you don't really understand to a full extent how abnormal it is until you kind of come of age and your friends, you're like in your 20s and your friends are like, dude, this is like not normal. You know, I'd have people over and they'd be like, why is your dad so this way or that way? And, you know, I think as you age, you kind of figure out like, this is not normal. And like I said, I've always been in the church, so I've always kind of had this innate sense that there was a God and that like the message was true, but a lot of times I just didn't like the messengers. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
just kind of like, man, I know this message is true. So while I did go through like my rebellious stages, I did the whole, you know, drinking thing for a bit and like, you know, just hanging out with people that I probably shouldn't have looking back that are now probably all in jail at some point. Um, like I always believed that there was a God. So in a weird way, I would be the person that would be like around a lot of troubled people, but never really get into the full extent of trouble that they went down. You know, I always had like this whole thing where it's like, I think there is a God that exists, and I think that like the message is right. So it was a lot of just like more just trying to figure out like my interpersonal issues of like why is this happening. And then, you know, after my parents divorced, I went through heavy counseling and therapy, and like I got to kind of, you know, before it was just kind of like everything was kind of kept hidden and justified. And so up until like my early 20s, I didn't really call it what it was. I'd be like, you know, me and my dad, like, we got into tussles, we would have misunderstandings. And after talking to a counselor, a therapist, she's like, no, like you were abused, man. And when I finally got to call it what it was, that's when like I just broke. And I, because there's that cognitive dissonance that goes on where new information, you know, challenges old ways of thinking, and you're like, man, that was bad. So now it's just like I'm free to kind of share that testimony and free to do that. But it was like an incremental process where it's like I never fully turned my back on God. I was just trying to figure out like I don't understand God, you know. So I'd walk around with like the blue hair and the piercings and the tattoos and all that stuff. But deep down, there was always like a heart for God at the core. It was just kind of like, I just was like, I don't know how to figure this out, or, you know, just separate the two things. Um,
Yeah.
it's still a process. I think that there is still a process to where like I think about things, I'm like, man, why does it have to be that way? Why,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's just a continual fight of trying to figure out, like, I know what's true as it relates to God and the Bible, but it's always just like a journey trying to like keep that inner peace going on.
Right. That's the spiritual experience. It's not always
Yeah,
easy. But yeah,
yeah.
I definitely think that is like very inspirational because a lot of people that I meet along the way were like Catholics, and they're like, I'm in Catholic recovery. So
Oh,
and they're like, I'm recovering from that. So and they end up just ditching the God altogether because they kind of connect God with the corruption of the church. And so I think it's extremely inspiring that, there was corruption clearly that you had to deal with every time he would minister, and then um on your days, and then now here it is, you're a Christian musician that's going
yeah,
into churches to sing and glorify God. So I just think that that's an incredible thing for the people that have, because I mean, you see it in the people that distance themselves from the church because of the corruption in the church, and you see that they're just like lost. You know what I mean? Like they just don't know where to go.
absolutely, man. And, you know, I think that that's an important thing, just being in the church, because like a lot of times, like, there are people broken outside of the church, and I love to do, you know, I've opened for a lot of different bands that aren't church bands at all.
Yeah.
But we kind of sometimes, you know, fail to realize that there are broken people within the church too, that's just, you know, they're suffering similar things that I've suffered that you might not even know
Yeah.
about. And that's why, like, when I talk about on the 7 Day Slumber Tour, you know, confronting abuse within the church, I mean, I know that's an uncomfortable subject because, like you said, we like to pretend like we have it all together sometimes. But there,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure I've had it happen to where I've had people come up to me and be like, dude, that same exact story happened to me. I was a pastor's daughter, and my dad was very abusive to me. So I know it's paying off somewhere, and I know that, like, you know,
Absolutely.
the message that needs to get out there, whether it be in the church or outside the church, because within the church, you're touching people that, you know, are going with, or like me, kind of stayed within the church walls despite the chaos. And then when you go to a club or a bar, you're confronting people that turned their back on the church and have kind of gone to the bar because, you know, that's kind of just another social thing they like to do, but they're struggling from hurts from the church or, you know, a family structure that just kind of let them down, or authority figure or whatever.
Yeah. I was in the bar about a year ago or a year and a half ago, and it was happening all the time that I would hear people in there talking, like basically ministering to one another in conversations
Oh
across
wow.
from the bar. And it was like a year and a half ago I was in there and I heard them over there talking and I'm like, amen. So
Oh
I
wow.
I mean it is that I think it is that what you're open to actually seeing. I think that and I talked to a guy once, he's like, I was actually saved by a guy in the bar that was ministering the word from me for me. So, you know, it's not so much to judge that, I guess. It's like you can like really make a difference sitting in the bar too. But so we definitely have that going on there too. I mean, God's everywhere, so
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, you know, I've had, like I said, when I was performing out live in bars and clubs when I was doing, you know, the band thing, like a lot of people would come up to me after the show and say, "Hey, man, what you said from stage was really impactful to me and everything." And it wasn't even, you know, for the most part, I didn't preach a lot in my set. I would just try to say one thing by the end of each show and just be like, you know, this is kind of what I've been through. And, you know, I don't know where you come from tonight, but God loves you. He cares about you. And really, just that was enough to really elicit a response. Because when you're going into the bar, I don't think that you expect it as much as sometimes the
mhm.
church. They're great, but I think we've become numb to the message and it becomes less impactful. So, in my experience, I've had great experiences across the board with church and with, you know, secular venues and things like that. But I will say that when it comes to secular venues and bars and people and stuff like that, I've had some of the most dynamic stories when it comes to just like people being like, dude, I didn't expect to hear that from you, and it really impacted me and like left me something to go home and think about.
Right. And I think it's like incredible too, like you, because I whenever I watched you at the show, what I enjoyed the most about it, I mean, I loved your performance and all, but I really appreciated watching you go through and talk to everybody. But it wasn't just like hey, how are you doing, which that's typically how you would introduce
Yeah, yeah.
yourself. But it was like it was more than that. It was like, who are you? Like, I want to know who you are. And if you're interested, like, I'll give you who I am too, with complete authenticity and transparency. So it was really beautiful watching how that you impacted people, before you even got on the stage.
Yeah, man, it's funny because, like I said, I've always loved to do stuff in music, but for me, um, you know, I love performing. That's like one of the things that just gets my blood pumping and everything else like that. But more than that, it's like music is kind of means to connection with people. And so I view that as like from the minute I go to a venue to the minute I leave the venue, I really put my most into trying to just get to know people, because that's really what we're called to do. Like, and you see a lot of people in the music scene or in bands that just kind of, they still have that like rock star mentality, and they kind of just, they're by themselves. They sass off to the sound man and get everybody, you know. But for me, it was just kind of like, hey man, I'm lucky to be here. There's so many people that are doing music, and you know, I'm lucky enough to be doing this. And really, I'd be nowhere without, you know, one, the blessing of God. Number two, you know, fans and people like that that'll support you. So I mean, to go to a show and to like treat every person like they matter, because they do, is super important.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have that. I know, like me growing up, like I didn't have that love at home. So, and the church is where I found normalcy. And I think that's another reason too why I advocate church so much too, is like, some families, especially with like addiction running rampant, it's almost like a pandemic.
Oh,
in
sure.
America that kids need to know that it's like cool to go to church, but also like you know that's where normalcy is and stuff like that. So to really like the kids like really look up to us adults, you know what I mean? And when we can show them God's face in that, it's just it literally lasts the rest of your life. It's like motivates me right now today is the church growing up and showing me that there is normalcy out there. I just because it's not at home doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's been cool to kind of watch your ministry grow because I know we've had a lot of like off the record conversations just about like our ambitions and what we want to do for God. And it's cool to see that, you're getting these interviews done with a lot of just different people and voices in the Christian community. And so what are some of the what do you think that God's putting on your heart nowadays to kind of continuing on this ministry? What are some of the things that you're thinking about in this time as far as when it comes to our daydream and where you're at?
I think that I'm still waiting for that word. So I'm basically like at the point now where I'm not so much trying to figure things out, but I'm just taking things one thing at a time as it comes to me. And it was pretty awesome that I finally bugged Terry Vassar long enough to where he did a interview with me. And so I finally got him on there. And then after that, it was like now I have an interview set up for like every Monday for like the next like 5 weeks. So,
Oh,
and then I was supposed to have one last week, and I have like an author that asked me to do um a interview. And then also, though it's not a part of the religious belief, but I also have an astrologer that asked me if I could do an interview, so I figure I would enlighten people that way too. And so, but I'm just like accepting anybody, like, what's your inspirational story? Like, what do you have to inspire me and the world? And just try to draw that out, like, because we all have our own story and our own experiences. So, and I want to share that of others with the world. Like, what do you have to provide us an inspiration to show people, you know what I mean? Like, it's not all about what you see right now, but there's a lot of good people in this world, and there's a lot of good things in this world and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's like every day I've been getting a new interview.
hey
So
man, that's awesome because I remember kind of behind the scenes encouraging you and saying like, dude, um, I would just encourage you to just schedule an interview, and just try to see where you can, like, every time try to just be consistent with it. And so to see our daydream continue to grow is really encouraging to me. And I know, eventually we'll have our own music festival like we've talked about,
oh,
man.
that would be
Our
awesome.
Dream Music Festival, put that out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Anybody interested in donating?
Right, right. We could definitely, I think that that's one of those things where it could happen. So I'm glad that everything is going well, and I'm glad that I finally got to do this with you.
I
Um,
know.
we've been trying to do this, and then with the tour schedule the way it was, and then the technical issues the way they were today, I'm glad that we conquered that. Um,
Yeah.
but but yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then I'm gonna also share out your tour schedule if that's all right.
Yeah,
So people know where
absolutely.
you're gonna be.
Yeah, right now, Lori, like I said, Lori Rojas, who is Joseph, the lead singer of Seventh Day Slumber's wife, she does a lot of the booking. So we have locations, but I'm not 100% sure where the churches are and all of that up until we leave, and she kind of knows the tour schedule. But I think the tour schedule you have has like a roundabout where we'll be.
I could even share the updated one whenever it comes out and just like tag it onto the blog and
Oh,
stuff.
thank you.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so
that'd be
that
awesome.
people can check you out and see Matt Sassano on tour with Seventh Day Slumber. Seventh Day Slumber is a recovery band. They do speak a lot about addiction and not my name is like it just needs to be number one like right now.
Oh,
It's
man.
such a good song. It's such a good song and it's so inspiring and yeah, I love that song so much. It's in my playlist. I listen to it often and I love it.
Oh, thank you so much, man. And yeah, you were right. A lot of this is about recovery. This is actually going to be called the 7 Day Slumber Recovery Tour. So we're hoping to see some great things. We've seen a lot of great things on the first half of the tour, from just talking to recovering addicts. We talked to disabled veterans, all that kind of stuff, and had them share their stories. So I know when we go out on the West Coast, it's going to be a great time, and we're just praying that we get to rock out hard, crazy, and at the end of the day, our lives change with that. So we're excited, man.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate you
you
and I love
so
you.
much. Our daydream for life. I'll see you later.
Bye.